Okay, so today we begin Parshat Vayechi. That's the last reading of the book of Genesis. It begins on chapter 47, verse 28, page 180. So, a couple of things that I notice about this reading. First of all, so the bulk of the reading, the bulk of this week's Torah reading, is Yaakov, Jacob's last words, both privately to Yosef, to Joseph, and to his grandchildren, and then to all of his sons. So before we get to the ending, I just want to focus on that part briefly. He talks about one, I think, important instruction that we can derive from this reading is the importance to prepare for one's death. How one prepares for one's death. Death.
Oh.
How one should prepare for one's death. Rabbi Gans always would say that the future belongs to the one who prepares for it.
That's interesting. That is true.
Yeah. So we are often uncomfortable even saying the word death. Right? It took me 3 times until you really believed that I was really saying it. And
I like to write it down.
Write this down. The future belongs to the one who prepares for it. So we are uncomfortable often talking about death, not for nothing. I mean, I don't know that we always know why we're uncomfortable talking about death. Is it that we're afraid of dying or that we're afraid of being dead? I don't know. Maybe we just, as humans, we're conditioned to live in the status quo, to try and maintain the status quo, and so a change from a status quo so significant as being alive is hard for us to absorb. Perhaps another, the idea of being irrelevant might be afraid. Certainly pain and suffering that comes in dying, but that's not necessarily the case.
I think from my experience, of course others have different experiences, they're older than me, but I think people who are not finished putting their stuff
Yes.
from the past away and in order,
Right.
they are afraid to die.
Right. We still have things to do.
Yes.
And things that have strong emotional significance. Yeah. Heavy things.
Those people suffer a lot in bed for many years.
Yes.
And don't give themselves permission to relax and die.
Yes.
I think you have to have peace of mind when you die.
Yes.
Die is inevitable.
Yes. Right. It's important to remember that death is not if I die, it's when I die. Right. It's not a question of if. And we talk about it as though it were a question of if. I could be the first.
Listen, it's not by age. It's not chronological. It could be anything.
We don't know. Right. Right. So okay, there are those who are working on extending life, and that the reality, however, is that in the meantime, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, and Torah expects us to see it as a matter of when, not a matter of if.
It's the end part of life.
Yeah,
It's part
So I want to qualify that statement. Death is a part of life. I would say that death not necessarily is a part of life. It should be a part of life, meaning that the end of something is not necessarily a part of something, right? It's the end of something, right? I'll give you an example. There's a cryptic statement in the Talmud that rabbis have difficulty explaining. It says that everything that the master of the house tells you to do when you're a guest, you should do, except for go out.
My father used to
Kol
say
ma
that.
sheba'al habayit omer lecha aseh chutz mitzeh. Right? Everything that the master of the house, if you're a guest in someone's home, everything that the host tells you to do, you should do, except for go out. So that's maybe one way of explaining it, that it's a joke. Another interpretation is that it's an editor's error, that it's supposed to be chutz mi dalid aleph, not chutz mi tzadik aleph, chutz mi dvar isur.
Midvar?
Isur, except for something forbidden, right? The fact that they're the master of the house doesn't give them the right to compel you to do something against your principles. Okay, fine.
So what is the, instead of tse, it's se?
Dalid aleph, chutz mi dvar isur, dalid aleph. Right?
It's like this.
Yeah. Okay. Another more Talmudistic, legalistic approach to understanding this is that everything that the master of the house tells you to do is a representation of his jurisdiction as the master of the house, as the host. But as soon as you leave, he's no longer the master of your house. He's no longer the balabayit. He's no longer your host once he's asked you to leave. And so therefore, leaving is never something that you do because the balabayit told you to do. It is the moment at which he becomes no longer the balabayit, the master of the house. So that's kind of a mathematical or philosophical, scientific approach to an analytical approach. Of course, there's a more Kabbalistic understanding, which is to say that God tells us to do many things. And God is our ultimate balabayit. He's our ultimate host. We are a guest on God's earth. And God tells us to do many, many things. And God could even threaten consequences for doing the wrong thing. However, there is one thing that God never tells us to do, and that's to give up hope on life. We should never give up hope on life. We should never say that God told me to do X, Y, Z, and I've been so terrible, and therefore I'm worthless. Because that would represent using the words of the host as a motivator to leave the house. That's not appropriate. That's not everything that the master of the house tells you to do, you should do except for leave.
Okay.
That is, everything that Hashem tells you to do, you should do except for give up hope on yourself. Except for deny yourself the opportunity to do teshuvah. So a person says, Hashem told me that I'm a rasha, that I'm a wicked person, and therefore I'm no good. That's leaving. That's giving up hope on yourself. That's giving up on teshuvah. You have to insist, no, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I want to stay on your earth. I want to stay in life. I want to continue to have hope that I'm not leaving, no matter how bad I've been. I listen to everything you say, Hashem, but that I don't have a hope for teshuvah, this I cannot hear from God. You're saying, would God ever say, give up on yourself? No, of course not. But I think it's sometimes we hear in the voice of God, we hear it. It doesn't mean it's there, but sometimes we hear it. We think we hear God saying, you're worthless. No, We have to remember, Kol ma she'ba'al habayit omer lecha aseh chutz mitzay. Stay, hang on. Don't give up hope.
It also says, "Ubechar b'chaim." It
Right.
does tell you,
Yes.
choose life.
Yes.
So there's no question about
Absolutely, it's the right
But
thing.
It's still part of life. It's
Right. So this.
conclusion of
Right.
life.
So what I wanted to say is that going back to the analytical, legalistic approach, right? Death is not a part of life because it's the tzei. It's the there's no longer, it can't be a part of life. I'm getting too Talmudic, but it can't be a part of life because life is over at death, right? It's like, whatever. It's not. I'm getting overly analytic.
It's a conclusion of life.
It is. So, but what I want to say is that there's actually a significant way that death is a part of life, and that is in the way that it informs our decision making while we're alive. Being cognizant of death is an important way in which death becomes a part of life, and not only does death become a part of life, but it informs life. It inspires us to be more mindful. Libo, that those who are living should take to heart, and limnot yamenu, right? Limnot yamenu kein hoda. We should v'navi levav chokhmah, that we by counting our days we become wiser for it. So by being aware that life is a finite life on earth, is a defined finite mission with a point at which we have to live as though we have a job to finish. So that's a way in which life is a part of death. So therefore, it follows then that it's important to prepare for death, to think about that, and to make that something that we do. Very practically speaking, we see this from Yaakov. He instructs his son to be the executor of his estate. He chooses Yosef, who is the most able to carry out his wishes. Logistically, Yosef was a man of means and opportunity, right? He was the viceroy of Egypt. This would be the best person. Nothing against the other brothers. He's the one to get the job done. And he says, I want you, this is where I want to be buried. This is the place that I want to be buried.
Why is burial so important?
Why is burial so important, and where we're buried?
Where you will be put into a way is so important. That piece of earth or that particular person, place, or that particular address. Why is it so important? Right,
that's a great question, and I think it addresses.
It's very human. It's not for the dead. It's really,
if we say right, it's for those who live after, right? Let's say that I want to focus on that question a little bit in a little bit of time when we get to the end of the Sidra, because the question comes up again, where we're buried. But we certainly see from Yaakov that it's important to him where he'll be buried. And he commands his son to go to great lengths to bury him in Israel. Yeah, to bury him in Israel. And from here we learn that there, halachically, that in the order of priorities of where a person should be buried, two factors are important. One is to be buried with family, and v'shachavti im avosai, verse 30, I shall sleep with my ancestors. And the other is to be buried in Israel. And that we see actually from Joseph, who makes that request, that he wants to be buried in Israel. So these are two, that we want to be buried on sanctified ground, and we want to be buried with family.
In that case, why Joseph is not buried where his ancestors were buried?
That's a good question.
It was a different place.
That's a good question.
When we go to visit, it's a completely different address.
Yeah.
Today we can't go visit.
Right. It's in Shechem.
Yes.
Right. Otherwise, in the Arabic name Nablus, but Shechem is where Yosef is buried. And it's a good point. He's not
They
buried.
destroyed the place also.
They did destroy the place. He's not buried in Hebron with Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And from here, we really see that there are these two factors. One is, meaning there's a value in being buried in Israel, even not with family. And then there's a value in being buried with family as a value of its own. So why Yosef didn't get buried, it's a good question and worth looking into.
He worked so hard to bring his father with horses and get permission from the king with wagons, and it was such a big deal.
Yeah.
It should have been important for him to ask for the same thing.
Yeah,
he deserved it.
One possibility is simply that that he ran out, that there was no room in Marat Machpelah. And the reason I say that, well, I when we see it, we've never been down to the crypt. Right. Rambam gives a specific architecture to the way a crypt should be, the way an underground burial in a cave should be organized. And there is a specific number of graves that classically go in such a place. That's a possibility. I'm saying this off the top of my head. I should really look up the Rambam and quote it, and we could check it up and count the people and see if that's... But that's, I think, one line of research that I would follow to see whether or not that's the case. And then there may be other reasons. Let's put that on the side and see if we come up with any. Maybe we'll speak about it on Shabbos if I come up with anything. It's a good question.
There must be practical reasons beyond us.
Yeah.
There is reason.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, where is Joseph buried?
In Shechem. It's called where the Palestinians live now. Mm-hmm. And they destroyed his grave, and they killed many people there.
Yeah.
Many. There was a religious Jew, I remember, who had a big family. He went very early in the morning to visit, against knowing that it's dangerous, and he was killed. And he was the last one, and since then they destroyed the place. And they believe in Joseph too. I mean, they respect Joseph also. I wonder why they did that.
Yeah. So this is number one. Number two is, look at verse 31. He says, I'm going to sleep with my ancestors. You'll carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial ground. And Joseph said, Anochi esechid varecha, I will do as you say. And Yaakov said, Hishavali, swear to me. Vayishavalo, and he swore to him. He swore to him. And then this is the line that I wanted to focus on. Vayishtachu Yisrael arosh hamita. And now Jacob is known as Yisrael, which is his name, his higher name, the name that reflects his strength, bows down at the head of his bed.
Bows down to Joseph?
No, he bowed down upon the bed's head. He bowed al rosh hamita. He bowed down at the head of the bed. Why does he bow down at the head of the bed? So Rashi brings down a midrashic teaching that says that the head of the bed is a sacred place. It's a holy place. I mean, on a basic level, he's bowing in thanks for Hashem that he now has this assurance that he can kind of be at peace. So he's grateful for that. Hatarat ha-sfekot. He's grateful for having sfekot. He's grateful for having the doubt resolved, for having his anxiety calmed.
But physically, he couldn't stand up and bow down.
So he did.
He was very old.
He was. So he was.
And he was blind.
Yeah.
So he couldn't do it any other way.
Yeah.
That was, he was limited.
Yes.
That was his best.
So yes. So yes. So you could say that he lay back down. You could read it that way, that he lay back down. But Rashi brings this midrashic teaching, which I always found fascinating, that the head of a sickbed is considered a holy place.
So is this scene taking place with Jacob in bed?
Yes.
Yes.
You figure,
Yes.
which makes bow down seem a little physically. I'm trying to get the
Yeah.
picture.
Yeah.
A little odd.
Yeah. I can't figure what physically what he did. Which is why some read it as though to say he was sitting up in bed the whole time and now he lay back down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but,
But-
when you bow down forward, not backwards.
Right, but the language is not and Yisrael lay back down. The language is that he prostrated himself,
Yeah.
as though in an act of prayer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the act of prayer is specifically pointing to that he's doing it al Rosh Hamitah, right there in his bed. So I think that this, the way I understand why it is that the sickbed is considered a holy place, is that really it's a time it's a time of the ultimate vulnerability, especially a sickbed like this, on his deathbed. It's a time of the ultimate vulnerability, and it's a time in which a person senses that they are in God's hands. It's there's always this conflict in a makom. What do we mean when we say a holy place? I think all holy places are places in which we are more aware of God than we are of ourselves. The presence of God is evident there, and so in a sense, the sickbed might be a place in which because we feel how helpless we are, we therefore naturally turn to God. And so the sickbed might be a place that is potentially a shrine, a place like a place of prayer. Is the sickbed.
I can back it up by saying that the Western Wall was never a place to pray.
Yeah.
It was the Holy Temple. The Western Wall was just a wall.
Right.
But the fact that people over thousands of years have been coming there, it became holy.
Right. And I
And
think
the fact that we go and visit a person who is about to die and he is dependent on God, and we turn ourselves to pray, maybe it becomes the head of the bed. Maybe it becomes a holy place where you take a few seconds or a few moments to really think about life.
Yes.
And make a resolution, or maybe beg for the sick person to get better or not suffer.
Right. So the kotel is a good example. It's interesting you bring up the kotel, is because the kotel is, in a way, was never a place to pray. But it's only once the temple is destroyed that the kotel becomes a place to pray at, because it's kind of the head of the sickbed in a way. It's a place where we turn to pray, because we sense at the kotel our vulnerability. We sense what might be and what is not. Right? It's on the one hand, it's the place of our ultimate hope, but on the other hand, it's the place of our ultimate frustration. Right? That's the kotel, the Western Wall.
That's all we got.
Right. That's all we have so far. Right. That we're standing at what could have been or what we wish would be. Right. And so that's, in a sense, and it's in the presence of such holy possibility that it becomes such a holy place, such a place of prayer. Of course, the Beit HaMikdash, the temple itself, is the place through which all our prayers go. But nonetheless, the kotel itself becomes this kind of the sickbed. And in a way, when we talk about hope for life, the sickbed becomes a place in which we express our profoundest hopes for what the value of life is. It's the place in which, in our prayers, we are not giving up.
We still have hope.
Right. So there's a certain holiness there that represents the sanctity of life as well. In a sanctity of life in the face of God, in our prayerfulness. We're recognizing that the sanctity of life is not something that we control. It's something that we hope for, we believe in, and we reach to Hashem for. So therefore, it's precisely in the helplessness, but it's not just abject helplessness. It's not helplessness with an end. It's helplessness that reaches into prayer. So that's, I think, the most powerful thing of all. There's another reason that the deathbed is that the sickbed is a holy place, and I think it's because it's a place of transition. It's a place in which the universe, the fabric of the universe, opens up and is never the same again, or it's the possibility of change happening. Which I think is another interesting idea about the deathbed or the sickbed. You had a thought.
So it's almost like rebirth, or
Yes.
Rebirth.
Yes.
Right? Because we are learning about this, can we say? I mean, I hope I'm not touching a negative subject. That anywhere when 10 people get together, 10 people who pray, even in a Reform synagogue, there was holiness in it. In that case, if a stone of the kotel became holy, that space should be holy too.
Absolutely.
Whether it's men or women or whatever.
Yeah.
Neshamot who are together in unity in my house, in the street, in the corner, in the shuk, where they get together to pray anywhere, even for the goy. There must be some holiness in that too.
The idea, of course, is that if a place is designated to reach to Hashem,
yes,
then definitely, it's a holy place. I don't want to get into polemics, and of course there's an old Hasidic teaching that says that, in Kabbalah, there are many different names of God. And they each represent different aspects of divine energy. This is a lot of Kabbalistic work is on the names of God. And there's an old Hasidic teaching which is that there's a name that's higher than any name in the Kabbalah. There's a name of God that's higher, and that is the Eibishter.
The what?
The Eibishter, which means no. It's a Yiddish.
What is Eibishter?
It's a Yiddish word that means the one above, and it's the name that it's no. It's a simple Yiddish word that means the Eibishter, the one above. Like I will tell you, go to the Eibishter shelf, go to the highest shelf, and take it. It's a word. It's not a word that means God. It's a word that means the thing on top, right? So, or you could say, it's a name that a child uses. It's a Hasidic teaching that comes from this context. So we could think of maybe in our language, in our common language, what that would represent. I wouldn't use any name. It's not a Hebrew name, and it's not a name that has any Kabbalistic connotation. On the contrary, it's the most unsophisticated and unlearned name that a person could possibly use for God. And it's the highest because in simplistic naivete, this person means simply the highest thing possible. When they say the Eibishter, they mean the highest thing possible. And so they really they're really touching the highest. They're touching higher than any Kabbalist could ever touch, because they're not held back by any of these sophistications that are necessary, that are a human understanding of something beyond human understanding. So this is point number one. Point number two is, so here's the vulnerability of theology, as I want to say. On the other hand, so that's what I want to say about the difference between people, is that you have sometimes people who really mean the Eibishter. Unfortunately, we have theologies that squash that. And here I'm not talking about Kabbalistic teaching, because clearly Kabbalistic teaching is trying to reach that Eibishter, and it's trying to talk about the oneness of the universe. Anyone who's learned any Kabbalah understands that ultimately everything translates back to the oneness of infinity. But there are certainly, whether well-meaning or misguided, quote-unquote theologies that are stifling that natural Jewish spiritual instinct to reach up for the Eibishter. Where we have so I want to say that I think that largely most people who gather to pray anywhere are reaching for the Eibishter. They're reaching for the transcendent beyond and feeling that it's present. And any issue that one would take would be with a theology that stifles that, and gets in the way of that puts things, complicates that, and puts things in the way of expressing that or connecting to that. So that's yes, the Eibishter is always present, and anywhere we call out to him, he's close. So
can we say it's something transcendent, a being high above? We don't have translation.
I don't want to say that God is anywhere, right? If we say that God is a being,
yeah,
right?
It's a more human term.
Right, God is being itself, or being itself is of God. Okay, so that's what have we said so far? Prepare for your death so that it can inspire your life. 2 steps to preparing for death. 1 step is logistical, and the other is inspirational. Logistical is make a funeral arrangement while you're still alive. It's very important. Make a funeral arrangement while you're still alive. Even if a person has children, they should still make those arrangements, because number one, it's an act of kindness to those who survive, that it's taken care of. Number 2, it's a way of teaching. And this leads into the second. It's a way of teaching the next generation what is the right way to die, and what's the right way to be buried, and what do we stand for. And so by preparing that in advance and sharing that with people and saying, look, this is my pre-need arrangement, this is my burial plot, this is where I'm going to be buried, it's paid for, it's not paid for, but these are my wishes. That's Aleph. And then the other is using the opportunity, using the time of death, using the end of one's life as a moment to pass on to the next generation. What do we care about? And this is why it's important we see that Yaakov did that. He spoke to each of his children and he gave them life instructions. He told them sometimes harsh words, sometimes complimentary words, but he told them the most important things that he thought they could ever hear. And that's that moment. So again, that's something that a person should think about. And in a way, when we talked before about life is a part of death, we can think sometimes about, is this thing that I'm doing right now something which will live past me, or is it something which will die with me? And it can be a very important way of identifying my priorities. Will this thing matter after I'm dead? Sometimes it will very much matter after I'm dead. And sometimes it won't.
What is a thing?
Whether my children go to yeshiva or not, will it matter after I'm dead? Absolutely. This comes from a thinking of having death be a part of life. It's important because I'm not going to be here forever. And therefore my children need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet in their own values, right? So I have to make sure that I give them the wherewithal to exist after I die. Should I keep this money to go to the restaurant, or should I give it to charity? Right?
But that has to start when the children are very young.
Absolutely.
At that moment,
That's why I say life is a part of death. It's always.
It's too late to tell the children to go to yeshiva.
Right.
Children go to yeshiva when you're
right.
dying.
Absolutely.
You have to do that. You have to work on that when you are young.
Right, which is why death is a part of life. Which is why at every stage in my life, I can ask myself, will this decision matter after I'm dead? Which house am I going to live in? Look, sometimes what color drapes I'm going to have is not going to matter whether after I'm dead, but which neighborhood I live in might matter after I'm dead. What kind of impact I have, what kind of impact it has on me. Think about it, moving to America. For many of our ancestors who came to America, this was a decision that changed history. Right? It matters after I'm dead. So I think that there are these kinds of decisions that that will make a difference after I'm dead. You have some thoughts, Professor?
I just wanted it has to be whether you should go to yeshiva. And nowadays, there's the important. I mean, in the news is the important thing. Which yeshiva? The one that also teaches mathematics and English,
yes,
or the one that skips that part,
right?
To really spend a lot of time with the Torah,
right? And that can be a great way of identifying what my priorities are in life, and is that something that I really care about or not. And I think another example, when we think about the environment, right? Thinking about these kinds of decisions in terms of what am I doing today that's going to matter after I'm dead, right? So, I think that's another example of that kind of thing.
But we do it during our life.
Always.
When my children see that I put in a recycling bin the paper and the plastics and the can, that's part of teaching without talking.
Right.
And sometimes I tell them in Trader Joe, I don't want a bag, I have my own. Right. Because I want to keep the world green for your generation.
Right.
They're so happy.
Right.
And they give me a piece of paper to put in the raffle. And I tell them, you're my witness. If I get a raffle, I give it to charity. Oh, I hope you win. It's not just teaching my children.
Right.
Even that person who's a stranger to me, who's polite, and that's his job to be, and giving service, it's part of Shinantan, and it's not just Levanecha. It could be anyone. They are going to be my
the next
children's
generation,
neighbor,
right.
my grandchildren, and my grandchildren's neighbors, or friends. Who knows?
Right. So it's the importance. So this is a way, again, in which death informs life, recognizing that we want to make certain decisions which will live in posterity, which will survive us. If something is truly important, then it must survive us. And if it doesn't survive us, then it's not a priority. It might be nice, but it's not a priority. Right? Now, going back to the drapes, there are times when the drapes might be important, right? It might be important that we may think that it's important that the way in which we live might create the kind of culture which would shape our family, would shape our future. Would, these calculations can exist, and they can be important. Okay, so then I'm going to skip over the whole the words that Jacob says to his children, and now we go to the very end. Now, at the very end of the Torah reading, we're going to skip now to page 191. The end of the book of Genesis. And this has it's such an anticlimactic way to end the book of Genesis. You read this? And Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. The end. And Joseph died, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. The end. But actually, we don't say the end when we read the Torah in the synagogue. We say Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek. Strong. Let's it's like you say that, and then you give like a big orchestral flourish, to sound of celebration. And yes, that's it. You said it. That's kind of like and read it again. Keep going at it. He died. Read it again. Keep going at it. It's kind of.
He was a celebrity at the end.
That's right, but look. If it might be better to say to end the verse on verse 24. Joseph said to his brethren, I'm going to die, but God will surely remember you and bring you up out of this land, which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. The end. Praise. Right? So, but this goes back to your question of why does it matter where we're buried? And here it's very clear that the fact that Joseph, the ending flourish of the entire book of Genesis is that Joseph was interred in Egypt. That's interred.
What does that mean?
Nitman.
Oh.
In Egypt. I say interred because he's embalmed and placed in a coffin and stored, but then ultimately that coffin is to be transported to Israel, right? So he's interred. Nitman, lo nikbar, right? And then the last, the next book, the book of Exodus, really discusses the exile, the Jewish people's descent into the Egyptian exile. And so the Chazak that we say, Chazak, Chazak, might be symbolic of how we go from the book of Genesis into the book of Exodus. We need the strength as we go forward into the book of Exodus.
For the transition.
For the transition. In a more symbolic sense, we might say that saying Chazak is taking strength from Torah study as we leave the synagogue, as we leave Torah study and go into the world. It's the end of the book. After you finish studying a book of the Torah, you finished. And so now we have to take the strength from that book of the Torah into our lives, going forward into life. So this last line, Joseph is in a coffin in Egypt, is a source of strength for us.
So is Chazak part of the Torah?
No, it's part of Jewish tradition.
And the paragraph below the Chazak.
The paragraph below the Chazak is a count of how many words, verses there are in the book of Genesis. So I'll read it to you. The sum of the verses, right? The sum of the verses of the book of Genesis are 1,534. And it says which is the midway point of the book of Genesis. There are 12 portions in the book of Genesis. And then it counts how many paragraphs there are in the book of Genesis. There are 91 paragraphs in the book of Genesis.
Now below that, there is an English translation of something that begins in the middle of a sentence. Where's the first part of that sentence?
Page 190. Page 190, note 26.
Oh, I see.
An echo of the words of the ancient warrior.
I see. Okay.
It's a good ending because he left a legacy. There was a future. He knew that they're going back.
Right.
He gave them the strength. He gave them something. Once I told my mother, Mom, my father-in-law, every time I go on a trip, he gets sick and we have to come back because he's dying. She said, do something I learned from my father. Give him a ring or something very expensive. Tell him to hold it. Tell him to hold it.
It's a beautiful
tight.
story.
I'm going and I'm coming back and I want you to keep it. That should be his mission and motivation to stay.
Right. Oh, very nice.
And I couldn't understand it. But you know what? I did it anyway because sometimes I don't understand. Maybe somebody knows something or understands something that I don't understand. But you know what? In a way, it worked. It was his job to take care of my ring while I was away until I come back. But then he was just too old, and I had to lie. I never told him I'm going away. I would have other people visit my children and this, so he will think that I'm there. I would call him from overseas. It was very hard, and tell him that, how are you? I'm coming. I can't come this week. I have a problem with one of the kids. I'll see you in a few days. So when are you coming? When are you coming? When, a week passed by, and before I knew it, it was over, and I came back. But it worked for a while.
Yeah, I think it's a very powerful message. This answers, I think, your earlier question. Why is it important where we're buried?
Yeah.
And this particularly the way Joseph is buried is unique.
Yes.
Because Joseph dies with the promise that I want to be buried in Israel. Mm-hmm. And he says, I want you to know we're coming out of here. Verse 24. We're going to be coming out of here. I die, but God will surely remember you and bring you up out of this land unto the land which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then he says, I want you to take my bones out of here. That's verse 25. And Joseph made his brothers swear, saying, God will surely remember you and carry my bones from here. And then Joseph died, and he's placed in an aron, in a coffin in Egypt, and he stays there with this twofold message. Number one, I'm put in such a way so that I may be taken out. And number two, I'm here with you the whole time. Meaning, Joseph represents the spirit that the Jewish people would never forget who they are all the time. So we have, on the one hand, we have the hope that we're going to come out of here, but on the other hand, we also have the presence of our identity with us, even in the exile. There's two kinds of hope, okay? One is the hope that's waiting for something better, which means that everything that's happening now is useless. There's another kind of hope, which says, I'm currently in a process towards getting to something better. I see where I am right now as connected to the future. Right now, it doesn't feel good, but I know that I'm right now in a process to getting somewhere better. And that's the idea that Joseph is in the coffin in Egypt together with me, that I have this attachment, this connection, not only a look forward to, meaning it's not that Joseph was put in the Sinai desert to and we'll pick him up on the way. No, Joseph is with us in Egypt, which is to say that there is even here and now a shrine, a place that we can pray, a place that we can connect to, that reminds us who we are as we work towards getting out. And specifically Joseph. And Joseph is the Jew who manages to keep his identity even as viceroy of Egypt. And so it reminds the Jewish people that you'll be in Egypt for a long time, but always hold on to me as an inspiration, that you can hold on to your identity, and you can be who you are, not forget who you are, even here in Egypt. And at the same time, knowing that you can hold on to your identity shouldn't be a source of comfort to say that you can stay here indefinitely. You have to. This is a kind of there's a dichotomy here. There's a little bit of a conflict. On the one hand, if a Jew says, I can't be a Jew until I get to Israel, until Mashiach comes, until I retire, I can't be a Jew because right now my life is not perfect, then they live only in hope. But right now is pointless and useless. So in effect, it is the certainty of their hope that causes them to see their present condition as useless. Because I'm planning on going to Israel, because I'm going to retire, because I know Mashiach is going to come, because I know life is going to get better, and I'm holding on to that hope, and I'm absolutely certain it's going to happen. And that's the only place I live, is in the future. So therefore, right now, I'm useless because I'm going to be going to Israel. The single person, because I'm going to get married, right now my life is useless. I didn't get married, whatever it is, So it's the certainty of hope that renders the present condition useless. That's the one option. The other option is that a person says, no, I have to learn to accept reality and to be in this current moment and to make the best of whatever life is. That being able to survive in an uncomfortable situation kills the hope. It means that I no longer think about the hope and I no longer hold on to that future. Yosef represents the fusion of those two. On the one hand, he is making them swear, we're going back to Israel. On the other hand, he is embalmed and entombed in Egypt. I am here, and I'm settled here fully, and I want you to know that I'm here with you fully. But at the same time, it's connecting. It's holding on to this, being attached to the hope for the future. Yes.
I'm kind of thinking of like a synthesis, perhaps. I mean, there's a dichotomy. Wouldn't there also be a synthesis of a guiding hope?
Yes.
His whole
Oh,
life,
beautifully put.
yeah,
Beautifully
guiding
put.
hope.
It's not a hope; it's a guiding hope. Beautiful,
Guiding.
guiding
I'm trying
hope.
to figure out how that can work in my
Yeah, yeah.
life.
It's like us American Jews who live here, in our heart is in Israel.
Right.
Most of us. I don't know. I'm looking for myself,
Ideally,
I guess.
ideally speaking.
Ideally speaking, we live here. We make the best of what we have here. We try to grow here, and our family grow, and present the best that we can, and give them good values, and support them, and whatever the future will bring, but they have to know that our future is in Israel.
Yeah. So it's the hope is one that inspires today. It's a guiding hope. Beautiful. And we know what we stand for and we live for, and it works out.
That's the answer today with problems we have this past month. All this anti-Semitism. It's reminding us again that this is not our place.
Well, there are also people
Perhaps we'll
speaking
have
up.
to make a change. We have to wake up. Maybe it's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, luckily there were 25,000 people on that
Maybe.
one. Has to continue.
Yeah. Alrighty. So let's remember that in the midst of our struggles and challenges, we are optimistic about the future, and we set ourselves to work in the present. And the last point is the name Yosef represents, the word means to add. We spoke about it once before. Adding something means that you're taking something that really doesn't belong here and you're adding it in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Taking that which is outside and bringing it inside is Yosef. Add, increase. And so that represents the ability to take that which doesn't seem connected to God, connected to enlightenment, and to find God there. And then we have added. So that's the work. Our work in Golus, our work in exile, is to be that's the where our hope for the future guides us. It tells us we have to find in the future, in the present, we have to find the Yosef factor. We have to find what is here that I'll never find anywhere else. How can I grow? How can I learn? How can I be enriched here in a way that I'll never be able to in the future? So may Hashem grant that we gather up what we need to gather up, and very, very soon we'll be able to carry the bones of Yosef, be able to carry all of our enrichment into the Holy Land. Meir v'yameinu. Chazak, chazak v'nischazek.
Happy